Welcome to this Friends Journal author chat. I'm Gabriel Ehri, Executive Director here at Friends Journal, here today with Chuck Fager. Chuck Fager is a Quaker historian, author, and former director of Quaker House in Fayetteville, North Carolina. He's the author of two new books, Angels of Progress, a documentary history of the Progressive Friends, and Remaking Friends, how Progressive Friends changed Quakerism and helped save America. He joins us from Durham, North Carolina. Thanks for joining us, Chuck.
Sure.
So, Chuck, how did Progressive Friends get their name? What does progressive mean?
It was a name they gave themselves, and they felt that they were more progressive than a rather hidebound and oppressive Quaker elite, that they were both challenging and were getting disciplined and disowned by. Mm-hmm. So there were a number of groups that were kind of essentially split from the Hicksites. We don't have time to explain any of that stuff, so I hope viewers will just understand. They split from the Hicksites and started organizations of their own, or yearly meetings, really, and they called them progressive.
Mm-hmm. And what in particular were the social issues that were the most prominent in their split from the Hicksites?
Well, they were external and internal. That was one of the things that caught my attention. Externally, they were particularly interested in abolition of slavery. The Quaker establishment, both Hicksite and Orthodox, was dead set against abolitionism. They were against slavery in theory. In practice, they were up to their necks in involvement with the slave economy, making money off of it. And they just said, leave it all to God, praise slavery, and otherwise shut up. And people like Lucretia Mott and the other earlier progressives said, no, we've got to... God told us to get to work. And so that was a matter where they got disowned for that. And so that was the external one. And then the internal issue was Quakerism in their day was a top-down hierarchical body, and they said that has to go. We have to have something like equality inside society as well as outside. And that was a very big struggle also.
So we see that some of our sort of candy-coated myths about Quakers always being morally upright in what we like to think of as the right side of history are not really true when you look back at the establishment Quakers in the 19th century.
Well, yeah, I mean, there were some good people there and trapped in bad structures and obsolete structures. Mm-hmm. And I'm afraid my work here has done a whole lot of myth busting for me, and I think it would also be a case for readers. The idea that there was a Quaker testimony to equality, that's a complete myth. That notion has really only been invented in the last 25 or 30 years. Mm-hmm. And that includes equality for women, even though women had more space in Quakers than they did in other churches. Quaker women were not equal within the society until about 250 years after Fox started preaching, the end of the 19th century. It was actually 1922 when good old Philadelphia yearly meeting Hicksite actually made women equal. 1922. That's really something.
Right.
So that's just a couple. And then the idea that Hicksites were all tolerant liberals and they always got along fine, unlike the squabbling Orthodox. And how do we know that? Because Howard Brinton told us so in this famous book. Here we go, to bring it up. See, friends for 350 years. I have the place marked.
Right, the big lie.
They got along fine, unlike the squabbling Orthodox. And that's just completely not true. I don't know where he got that idea. I think out of his left ear somewhere. So anyway, that's just... And then the idea that Quakers were always in the forefront of good social reforms. You know, I mean, helping against slavery was certainly a feather in our cap. But what about supporting prohibition, which both the Progressive Friends, the Hicksites, the Orthodox, the Evangelicals, they were all for it for 100 years. And they succeeded. And that's turned into a disaster, the effects of which are with us still today. Mm-hmm. Not to mention the notion that we always stood for free expression. They didn't stand for free expression internally. And there were lots of groups, and unfortunately the Progressive Friends were with us. They were all for censorship of what they call demoralizing literature. I think some of them would have been able to take Harry Potter, but the Hunger Games, not a chance.
Right.
And they wanted newspapers to exclude anything interesting about sex, violence, gory crimes. I mean, this is really something to read about.
Mm-hmm.
And then,
So,
of course, maybe the top myth of all, the idea that Rufus Jones invented liberal Quakerism.
mhm.
I know that feels good for you, for folks, but ain't so.
Well,
So anyway, those are just a few myths that we progressive friends help bust up.
so you really cite Progressive Friends as the inventors of liberal Quakerism, and it also sounds like, in your view, today's liberal Quakers have taken the idea of progress further down the line.
Well, yes, today progress for liberal Quakers translates to, voting Democrat, listening to NPR, driving a Prius. Um, but it's still with us. It totally is still with us.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think?
And
Why do you think the history of Progressive Friends, which is what you set out to uncover in your two books, Angels of Progress and Remaking Friends, why do you think that history was overlooked for so long?
well, I think there's a few reasons. One was the progressive friends weren't interested in history; they were interested in the future. They wanted to change the future, so they didn't bother to write it. Secondly, it was Orthodox friends who were interested in history, and so most of the major Quaker historians have been out of the Orthodox tradition. And it's not like I want to say there was a conspiracy, but Orthodox historians lived on one side of a very thick cultural wall, and there's stuff they didn't see, and the Progressive Friends were part of it. So, for instance, Rufus Jones, he wrote a big, fat two-volume work on the later periods of Quakerism, covering the period when the Progressive Friends were active, and he devotes half of one footnote to the Progressive Friends in about 900 pages. Well, I mean, okay, he's got his priorities, but that just doesn't cut it. But then the third factor, and maybe even one more important in the end, and this is not really the Progressive Friends' fault, but liberal Quakers today, they don't believe in history. We don't need it. I personally think that attitude is part of our middle class entitlement outlook. We don't need any of this stuff. If we need it, we'll go to the store and buy it.
Mm-hmm.
And that troubles me a lot, and it troubles me right here where I am in Durham, North Carolina. We have lots of good liberal Quakers, but they don't think they need to know anything about Quaker history. They don't need to know anything about the Bible. They don't need to know anything about Christianity, and they wonder how come people who have really retrograde ideas about the Bible and Christianity have taken over the state and taken over the South. Well, one reason is we're not even in the game because we don't know any of this stuff, and we haven't felt like we needed to. That's a big, big, big mistake.
Mm-hmm. And in reading Remaking Friends, you're citing this as a concern way back in 1920 that a lot of the most prominent figures in your history were saying, Quakers as we know it are going to die out because we're not biblically conversant. We're not going out and as missionaries and growing the flock. A lot of these are the same concerns that liberal Quakers that I'm around complain about today.
Well, yes, the last generation of what I would call progressive Quaker heroes, Jesse Holmes, Jane Rushmore, Henry Wilbur, those people, they were very, very liberal, but they felt it was very important for Quakers to know about, for instance, the Bible, because the Bible was both an obstacle, it was being used to defend all sorts of retrograde things, and a resource. That's what Quaker reformers used against slavery. Same thing with Christianity, generally speaking. And so they were advocates of Quakers knowing about that. It's different, and they made it clear, it's different knowing about, say, the stuff in the Bible than believing it all. You didn't have to believe it all, but it was important to be familiar with it. And it's not only for defense, there's some good stuff in there too.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's all true today.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Well, one of the things you note in the sort of afterthoughts in Remaking Friends is that we've lost in some ways the tradition in liberal Quakerism of recording friends as ministers, recognizing people that have some sort of prophetic gift, and sending them out there to essentially evangelize for Quakers and for Quaker beliefs. Um, so is that a mistake that we don't do that?
Well, we didn't lose it. Liberal Quakers laid down those offices. They abolished them, and I think it was an absolutely right thing to do. And we don't have time to go into all the reasons why, but it can for me, you can sum it up pretty clearly in variation on an old chestnut. Power corrupts, and religious power corrupts religiously. So I believe in celebrating outstanding or notable ministry and faithfulness. I'm all for that. In fact, we don't do nearly enough of it. But that's different from establishing and elevating offices like that of ministers or elders. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not hard to become a Quaker elder. I'm one. How did I do it? I kept on breathing, and pretty soon I'm a Quaker elder. Mm-hmm. You want to be a Quaker elder? Hang around a while, mm-hmm. because you have an asset that worked for me, and it'll work for you. The clock. An office would only make it trouble. We had trouble with this. One of the problems of not knowing our history is that we don't know that these things they didn't get lost in a desktop shuffle. They were laid down. They were abolished. And they were abolished for very good reasons, basically chronic abuse of power. I hear voices these days saying, oh, we ought to have it again, and you can trust us. We won't yield to the temptations of power. No, not us. Mm-hmm. We're different. We're better. We're new. Our consciousness has been raised. Well, I got a bridge to sell you, if you believe that. I got a bridge and a few other things, too. But don't do it. If people want to have informal committees for support and help them develop their ministry, that's fine. Making it official, no. Bad idea.
Mm-hmm. Well, as in reading these books, one thing that I really appreciated as a reader was that you seem to be having fun recreating the scenes based on the documents that actually led to what you did uncover as a historian. Was it fun to write these?
Well, in some ways it was. I mean, I certainly wanted to do it, and I'm glad I did it. But actually, it was very tough in lots of ways, because the period that I covered from about 1840 to 1940, it starts with a slide into war, and it ends with a slide into war. And I felt like I was kind of looking through somebody's window onto a scene from 1840 to 1860, and here's all these Quakers, even some I disagreed with, but nonetheless, here's all these Quakers wanting to end slavery and wanting to do so peacefully, and I know they're all going to fail. And they became very real to me, and it was difficult to live through that. Mm-hmm. So it was actually pretty grueling. But I'm certainly grateful to Pendle Hill for the chance to spend 9 months as a Cadbury scholar doing research on it. And if I've made it vivid for readers, then I'm glad of that too.
Okay. Well, that's all the time we have today. Just to set the table a little bit, you can read a review of Chuck's book, Angels of Progress, in the August issue of Friends Journal. This is Angels of Progress, which is the documents about the Progressive Friends with a little bit of commentary. And then the second book, Remaking Friends, is a narrative history. And both of them are available at Amazon.com or at Quaker Books. And thank you, Chuck. Appreciate you joining us.
Thank you, Gabe.
Take care.
Appreciate it.